One punch, old-timer. $50 says you don't get up. The bell over the bar was still swinging from the last ring. Rocco Lindell's hand shot out and swept Gus Mercado's beer clean off the bar top, mid-sentence, mid-law, playing to every phone in the room, glass in the air, foam breaking loose from the rim. 20 phones half raised, waiting for the crash, waiting for the old man to flinch. It never came. Gus's hand was already there, low at knee-height, palm flat, like he'd clocked the swipe, before Rocco's arm finished moving. The glass landed in his palm dead level, foam still standing an inch above the rim. Not a single drop hit the floor. The laughter that had started climbing up Rocco's throat died halfway out of his mouth. In the corner booth, an old longshoreman named Petey Kowalczyk set his rum down slow, both hands, the way a man sets down a drink when he's just seen something he doesn't have words for yet. His eyes didn't leave Gus's hand. Gus set the glass back on the bar. Steady, he pulled a rag from his back pocket, the same rag he used for pipe joints, stained at the corners, folded the way a man folds something he uses every day, and wiped the wet ring off the wood himself. "Not tonight," he said. 2 words. He didn't look at Rocco when he said them. He looked past him, at Lottie behind the bar, and gave her a small nod, an apology for a mess that wasn't his to make. Rocco recovered fast, the way men like him always do, laughing loud to fill the gap the room had left open. "Old man's got reflexes," he said, spinning it for the crowd. "Bet he can't say the same for his face." A few people laughed with him, fewer than usual. The jukebox kept playing under all of it. Some old country song nobody was really listening to anymore. Somewhere behind the bar, a bottle clinked against another. Too loud in the quiet, Rocco's joke had failed to fill all the way. Lottie's dish rag stopped moving in her hand. She was watching Gus's fingers, not Rocco's mouth, the way a person watches the one thing in a room that just did something nobody can quite explain. A deckhand near the pool table leaned toward his buddy and murmured something low. His buddy just nodded, slow, eyes still fixed on the old man at the bar rail. The bell would ring one more Friday before this whole story turned itself inside out, before the harbor talked about nothing else for a month. Nobody in the Brass Anchor knew that yet. Not even Gus, not really, not the shape of how big it would get. But before we continue, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what time you saw this video. Tonight's story is one you will never forget. 26 years. That was the number nobody in this bar knew. The number folded up small and carried quiet, the way a man carries a scar under a long sleeve. 26 years in the United States Army. Most of them spent teaching young soldiers how to fall, how to grip, how to take a bigger man off his feet without breaking a sweat doing it. Drill sergeant first, barking recruits into shape on a gravel yard in Georgia heat. Then combatives cadre, the man who trained the trainers, the one who stood in the middle of the mat while 2 instructors half his age tried and failed to put him on his back. He retired at 48 with a bad knee, a folder of commendations nobody in this harbor town had ever asked to see, and a silence he wore like a second uniform. He became a plumber, because pipes made sense to him. Straight lines. Pressure in, pressure out. Find the leak, fix the leak, move on to the next one. Lottie's husband Frank had been his first customer 20 years back. A burst line under the Anchor's kitchen sink on a Tuesday morning that flooded half the kitchen before Gus got there with his truck. Frank had insisted on paying him double that day, called him a lifesaver, and the two of them had been friendly ever since. Not close, not exactly, but the kind of friendly two quiet men build slow over 20 years of small favors and short conversations. When Frank died 4 years ago, heart, sudden, no warning. Gone between one Tuesday and the next. Gus showed up at the funeral in the only suit he owned, said nothing much to anybody, and started coming by the following week to fix whatever broke. Never took a dime for it. Lottie tried to pay him the first few times, and he just shook his head the same way every time until she stopped offering. Every Friday since, 1 beer, 6 o'clock sharp. Reading glasses hanging on a chain around his neck, the last quiet hour of a life that used to move whole formations of men with a single shouted word. He liked the Anchor because it never asked anything of him. Rocco Lindell decided that should change. Rocco was 30 years old, built like a man who spent more hours admiring himself in gym mirrors than actually training in front of them. And he had crowned himself the Brass Anchor's one-punch champ 2 years back. Knocked down a drunk tourist who could barely stand up straight to begin with, and never let anybody forget it since. He rang the bell over the bar every Friday after a win. He kept the challenge pot in a cigar box under the register and tapped the lid twice, every single time, like it was a ritual only he was allowed to perform. $50 in, last man standing takes the pot. That was the pitch he sold every Friday night, loud, grinning, working the room like a carnival barker. What it actually was, that came later. That came in pieces, the way rot always does, quiet at first, then all at once. The bell rang for the first time that matters in this story, 2 weeks before that beer ever got swept off the bar. A deckhand named Marcus Reyes, 22 years old, 3 days off a scallop boat, had $50 folded tight in his jacket pocket. Boot money. Steel toes for Monday's shift. The kind his foreman had already warned him twice about not having. Rocco picked him out of the crowd the way card sharps pick out tourists at a bus station. Young, a little drunk, a little proud. Exactly the kind who wouldn't walk away from a dare with the whole bar watching. "Come on, deckhand." Rocco's voice carried over the jukebox, aimed right at him, aimed at the whole room too. One punch, $50. You look like you can take a hit. Marcus laughed it off at first, waving a hand, trying to walk it back toward the bar. "Nah, man, I'm good. Just came in for a beer." Rocco wasn't having it. He climbed off his stool, crossed the floor, and clapped a hand on Marcus's shoulder hard enough to make him stumble half a step. "Come on. Everybody's watching now. You gonna walk away in front of your own crew?" 2 of Marcus's crewmates were watching from a booth by the window, and Marcus felt that weight land on him the way it always does at 22. Pride outrunning judgment before judgment even gets a vote. He pulled the $50 out of his jacket pocket, the boot money, and slapped it on the bar top. "Fine," he said. "1 punch." Rocco grinned, like a man who'd already won. He rang the bell once for the crowd's attention, before the fight even started, milking it, working the room into a hush. Marcus couldn't take it. He went down in 4 seconds flat, legs folding like wet cardboard under him, and Rocco rang that bell so hard it nearly came off its hook, and the cigar box got $50 heavier, and Marcus's boots stayed unbought through another cold week out on the water. He picked himself up slow, jaw already swelling, and didn't say another word the rest of the night. Just sat at the end of the bar, alone, staring at his own hands. His crewmates heard about it by Saturday morning, the way harbor news always travels, fast and exact. They'd seen Marcus limp onto the boat. Monday still favoring his jaw, still short the money for boots he'd been saving for since October. And word moved down the dock faster than the tide. By the following Friday, 6 fewer men were drinking at the Anchor, choosing instead a quieter spot 2 blocks over that didn't charge $50 to watch a friend get knocked down for entertainment. Lottie noticed the till first. She noticed everything now. Quiet, tired, the kind of tired that settles into a person's shoulders and doesn't leave. Rocco noticed the empty stools too, and blamed it loud, standing right next to the cigar box like the box wasn't the problem at all. "It's the economy," he told anybody who'd listen, shaking his head like a man burdened by forces beyond him. "Fuel prices are killing everybody. Guys are broke, not my fault. Nobody corrected him. Not yet." The room just got a little quieter every Friday after that, and nobody could quite say why out loud. After Marcus, Rocco started needling Gus directly. Every Friday, some fresh line, always aimed for an audience, always timed for maximum sting. "Janitor of toilets," he called him once. Loud enough for 3 tables to turn their heads. "That's your whole legend, huh, old man? Pipes and wrenches? You fix Lottie's sink for free, 'cause nobody's paying you to fix anything else." A couple of Rocco's regulars laughed. Gus didn't answer. He drank his 1 beer, slow, and let the words roll off him, the way he'd let 1,000 mouthy privates roll off him over 26 years of standing in front of formations. He had a reason for the silence, and it wasn't fear. Lottie had built this bar with Frank from nothing but a leaking building, and a dream neither of them could quite afford. And Gus wasn't going to be the man who turned Friday night into a scene and cost her business over an insult he could carry just fine on his own back. The next week it was worse. Rocco leaned on the bar right next to him, close, cologne thick enough to taste, and tapped Gus's wrench-calloused knuckles with 1 finger. "You ever notice nobody asks you anything in here?" Rocco said, grinning at his own crowd behind him. "You just fix stuff and go home. That's a sad way to live, old man." "Works for me," Gus said, not looking up from his glass. "Bet it does." Rocco straightened up, playing to the room now, voice climbing. "My old man used to say guys like you peaked in high school and never noticed the whistle blew. You peak yet, Plumber? Or you still waiting?" The room chuckled, uneasy, the kind of laugh that comes more from tension than humor. Gus set $2 on the bar for his beer, same as every week, and said nothing at all. Somewhere behind his own quiet, a memory surfaced fast and left just as fast. A gravel yard, a recruit half Rocco's age mouthing off the exact same way, and Gus's own voice back then, flat, unbothered. Sound off all you want. Private. The ground doesn't care how loud you are before it meets you. He'd learned the lesson decades before Rocco was even born. The man chasing the last word is always the one who needs it most. By the third week, Rocco had a nickname locked in. Toilet Man, he called across the bar whenever Gus walked in, loud enough to turn heads at the door. A couple of the newer faces picked it up, without knowing why, the way nicknames spread in small bars, harmless sounding, until you traced where they came from. One night, Rocco followed him out to the parking lot. Gus heard the door swing behind him, heard boots on gravel closing the distance, and didn't turn around right away. Hey, Toilet Man. Rocco's voice had a different edge outside, away from the crowd he usually needed. You think you're better than me? Walking out early every week like you're too good for the room? Gus stopped by his truck, keys in hand, and finally turned. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead, one of them flickering on a bad ballast. Gus had been meaning to mention to Lottie, I think you're a young man who's never been told no enough times to know what it means. That's supposed to scare me? It's supposed to be true, Gus said. Go home, Rocco. Sleep it off. Rocco stepped closer, close enough that Gus could smell the beer and the cheap cologne underneath it, close enough that a younger man might have flinched. Gus didn't. He just stood there, keys loose in his hand, weight settled, patient as a closed door. Something in Gus's stillness finally got through where the words hadn't. Rocco backed off half a step, laughed it off, unconvincing even to himself. Whatever, man. Toilet Man. He walked back inside without looking back, and Gus stood in the buzzing light a moment longer before climbing into his truck. Jaw tight the whole drive home. Rocco also started a tab that Friday. Beer after beer, shots for his friends, never once reaching for his wallet. Lottie let it ride, because fighting Rocco over money meant fighting the one thinking still bringing bodies through the door on a Friday night. And she didn't have the fight left in her for that math. Then somebody wrote it on the specials chalkboard. Nobody in the bar ever admitted to it. Not once. Not to this day. Underneath fish fry, $12 it read in neat block letters that had clearly taken some care. Rocco's tab, $340 and climbing. The whole bar laughed. Really laughed, the kind of laugh that had been missing from the anchor for weeks. The kind that made the windows feel less foggy. Somebody's chair scraped back hard from laughing, too sudden. A beer sloshed over a knuckle, and nobody bothered wiping it. Rocco tore the board clean off the wall. Chalk snapping in his fist, the powder dusting white across his sleeve like flour. He stormed out the back to smoke, boots loud on the linoleum. The door banging twice against the frame before it settled. He came back 10 minutes later, acting like nothing had happened, jaw set, eyes hard, refusing to meet anybody's stare, directly smelling faintly of menthol and frustration. Gus watched all of it from his usual stool, watched and said nothing out loud. and started paying closer attention to something else entirely. The jar. The jar sat at the end of the bar, hand-labeled Challenge Night in fat Sharpie letters, stuffed with folded paper names for the randomizer draw. Rocco always pulled from it with a flourish, like a stage magician, like the room's whole entertainment hinged on the mystery of who'd get picked next. Gus noticed the pattern, the way a maintenance man notices a slow leak long before anybody else smells the damp in the wall. Quietly, patiently, without saying a single word about it. The names that got drawn were always the same kind. Tourists passing through on their way somewhere else. Guys 3, drinks past good judgment, never the 2 quiet regulars from the boxing club down the block. The ones who trained 4 nights a week and could have ended Rocco's whole streak in about the time it takes to lace a glove. Gus didn't say anything yet. 26 years of drill field patience had taught him one hard lesson above every other. You don't move until you're certain, and you don't strike until the moment has earned it. So he just watched the jar, Friday after Friday, and the viewer watched with him. 3 weeks after the chalkboard, Rocco tried something new. The bar was fuller than usual that night, a birthday party spilling over from the back tables. And Rocco saw the crowd and decided it was his crowd, too. Hey, he said it loud, walking straight up to Gus's stool, close enough that people at the bar started turning to watch. Why don't you get in the circle sometime, old man? Scared? Gus set his glass down, unhurried. No. Then why not? Because you'd have a bad night, Gus said. Quiet, almost gentle, like he was explaining something to a kid who hadn't earned the whole truth yet. The room laughed at that, a real laugh, sharp, the kind that stung worse than any insult, because it came from Rocco's own crowd. Somebody at the birthday table in back actually clapped once before catching themselves. Rocco's face went red at the ears. He grabbed the empty stool next to Gus and shoved it hard across the floor, the legs screeching against the wood, a show of temper dressed up as a joke. Cute, Rocco said. Real cute, Plumber. Keep hiding behind your wrench. A woman near the birthday table leaned toward her friend. Did he seriously just throw a chair over a compliment? She whispered. Not quiet enough. A ripple of laughter followed her all the way to the bar. Rocco heard every bit of it and pretended not to. He rang the bell anyway that night, on some tourist who never stood a chance, just to remind the room who was still in charge. But 3 separate people near the bar had already pulled their phones out during the exchange with Gus, and none of them had pulled them out fast enough to catch anything worth posting. They remembered it anyway. That was the part Rocco couldn't undo. The room remembering a night where the old man hadn't flinched and Rocco had. The next crack in the surface came on a slow Tuesday afternoon. Gus was under the bar sink, fixing a sprayer hose that had been dripping for a week straight. Sleeves rolled, wrench in hand, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. Lottie was down in the cellar, counting stock. Rocco thought the bar was empty, except himself, wiping down glasses that didn't need it, killing time before the evening crowd came in. The bar was quiet at that hour. Just the hum of the beer cooler and the drip he was there to fix, the faint smell of bleach from that morning's mopping, still hanging in the air. Gus saw it through the gap in the service hatch under the register. Not because he went looking, just because he happened to glance up at exactly the wrong moment for Rocco and exactly the right moment for the truth. Rocco's fingers moving fast in the open till. 220s folded quick into his jeans pocket. Practiced. Smooth. The kind of motion a hand only gets good at through repetition. Gus's grip tightened on the wrench, without him meaning it to. His pulse didn't move. It never did, not in 26 years of moments that should have raised it. He just watched, still as the pipe he was holding, cataloging it the way he used to catalog a recruit's mistakes on a rifle range. Exact, unhurried, filed away for the correction that would come later, not now. Gus didn't move, didn't say a word. He finished the sprayer hose with hands that had gone very still, packed his tools slow and deliberate, and drove home with his jaw set the whole way, saying nothing to anyone. He came back the next day, not for a beer, but to find Lottie. He found her in the cellar doorway, one hand braced on the frame, looking older than she had any right to look at 58. "Gus," she said, before he could get a single word out. "I'm 3 months behind on the loan. I know about Rocco. I've known for a while, if I'm honest with myself. I just don't have the fight left in me to do anything about it. Frank always handled the hard stuff. I pour drinks. I count tired. That's all I've got left some days." Gus stood in the doorway a moment, hat in his hands, not sure what to do with them. "Why didn't you say something?" "Say what?" "That the only thing keeping the lights on Friday nights is a kid stealing from me while everybody cheers for him?" Her laugh came out cracked, not really a laugh at all. "I built this place with Frank out of a building that used to flood every spring tide. I'm not going to lose it to embarrassment. Better to lose it quiet." "You're not losing it," Gus said. Flat, certain in a way that surprised even him. Lottie looked up at him, then, really looked, the way she hadn't in months. "You sound sure." "I am now." That was the real moment. Not the beer sweep that came later, bigger, in front of the whole harbor. This was the moment Gus's protect the peace instinct finally died, standing in a cellar doorway that smelled like beer syrup and cardboard and dust. He'd told himself for months that staying quiet kept the bar calm, kept Lottie's business safe from a scene she couldn't afford. Standing there, he understood something different. Peace was never what he'd been protecting. Peace was just the last thing Rocco hadn't taken from her yet, and Gus was done handing that over too. He still didn't say much, old habits. But something in him shifted that day from simply watching to actively counting. Every insult, every unpaid dollar, every rigged draw. A ledger kept in silence. The way he used to keep track of a formation's mistakes before correcting every single one of them at once. The instant karma drip kept coming after that. Small at first, the way a slow leak becomes a flood if nobody stops it in time. The boxing club regulars had heard about the chalkboard by then. Word traveling the way it does in a small harbor town, and one of them, a welder named Dale Ossie, hands like cinder blocks. forearms scarred from sparks. Walked straight up to the challenge jar one Friday and dropped his folded name in himself, loud, right in front of everybody at the bar. "Put me in the draw," Dale said. Flat, no smile. Rocco laughed it off, waving a hand like he was swatting a fly. "Draw's closed tonight, man." Maintenance on the box. There was no maintenance happening on any box, and everybody standing close enough could see it in the way his eyes moved. The room noticed the excuse land wrong, noticed it more than they'd have noticed Rocco taking an actual loss. Word kept moving after that, the way it does among men who've already started doubting somebody out loud. The deckhand crews had their own harbor group chat, mostly boat schedules and weather warnings. But somebody floated a theory in there about the jar being rigged front to back. It spread fast. Friday attendance held steady in the weeks that followed, but it changed shape underneath. Fewer eyes on Rocco like he was a hero, more eyes on him like he was a man under quiet investigation. Dale brought it up to the other boxing club regular, a quiet kid named Tomas who trained middleweight, and rarely said much in public. They stood by the pool table one Friday, cues in hand, voices low under the jukebox noise. "You ever notice we've never once been drawn?" Dale said. 2 years. Not once. Tomas racked the ball slow, thinking about it. Figured it was luck. 2 years of luck? Tomas didn't have an answer for that. He glanced over at the jar, then at Rocco holding court near the register. And something in his face changed. The particular look of a man doing math he didn't want to finish. "Somebody should say something," Tomas said. "Somebody will," Dale said. "Eventually. This place has a way of sorting itself out." Neither of them knew yet how right that would turn out to be, or how soon. Then came the night the cigar box came up light. $40 short, right there in front of Rocco's own count. He swore up and down he hadn't touched it. Voice cracking a little on the word swear, which was new for him. He hadn't touched it. Lottie had. She'd started counting again, really counting. Not just glancing past it on her way to the register. And she'd moved the box that afternoon to check underneath for a false bottom she'd started to suspect might be there. There wasn't one. But Rocco's face when he realized somebody besides him had opened that box told half the bar everything it needed to know, without a single word said out loud. A phone got lifted quietly that night, filming nothing in particular, just in case something happened. Nothing did. Not yet. But the room had started watching Rocco, the way you watch a floor you already suspect is rotten underneath the boards. Rocco felt it too, even if he couldn't have named it. He started arriving earlier on Fridays, staying later, working the room harder than he used to, laughing louder at his own jokes like volume could patch what trust couldn't. He picked a fight with irregular over pool table rules that hadn't changed in 6 years. He snapped at Lottie once, in front of customers, over a beer that came out flat, and the room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with respect. Dale pushed dust his luck the following week. He dropped his folded name into the jar again, loud, in front of everyone, daring Rocco to make another excuse. Rocco didn't make an excuse this time. He reached into the jar, with a flourish, made a show of shaking it, closed his eyes theatrically like a magician about to pull a rabbit, and pulled a name that wasn't Dale's. A tourist in a cruise line hoodie, 3 drinks in, grinning like he'd won a raffle. Dale watched the draw happen and said nothing, but he'd been close enough this time to see something the room hadn't. The flick of Rocco's wrist as he palmed one slip and dropped another, quick, practiced. The kind of sleight of hand you only get good at through repetition. He didn't call it out. Not yet. He just looked over at Gus, 3 stools down, and found the old man already looking back at him, calm, like he'd seen the same thing and had already decided when it would matter. The tourist went down in 3 seconds. Rocco rang the bell. The cigar box got $50 heavier. Dale finished his beer in silence and walked out early that night, jaw tight, already composing the message he'd send to the harbor group chat before he even reached his truck. The message went up before midnight. Watched him palm a slip tonight. 2 years, and I've never once been drawn. Somebody check the math on this guy. By morning, it had 40 replies. Deckhand crews who'd lost their 50. A cousin of Marcus's who'd heard the story secondhand and had opinions to share about it. Somebody posted a screenshot of the chalkboard photo from months back, the one with Rocco's tab, written out in block letters, like evidence being assembled one piece at a time by people who didn't even know they were building a case. Rocco never saw the group chat. Nobody on the water cruise had ever added him to it, and nobody planned to start now. He just felt the room getting colder around him, Friday after Friday, and blamed the economy again, because that excuse had worked before, and he didn't have a better one ready. "Watch your tone with her," Petey said, low, from his booth, not even looking up from his drink. Rocco didn't answer that one. He just walked away, jaw tight, and didn't ring the bell again that whole night, even though 2 more tourists had wandered in, looking exactly like his usual type. Gus watched all of it from his usual seat, filed it next to everything else in that quiet ledger he was keeping, and waited for the Friday he already knew was coming. The one that would finally be big enough to hold everything he'd counted. That afternoon, before the final Friday, Gus sat alone at his kitchen table with a folder he hadn't opened in years. Commendations faded at the edges. A photograph of a much younger man in uniform standing in front of a formation that didn't exist anymore. He didn't linger on any of it long. He closed the folder, set it back in the drawer where it had sat untouched since he'd retired, and went to fix a leaking faucet for a neighbor 2 streets over. Because that was still the work that needed doing today, medals or no medals. He drove to the Anchor at his usual time. Same truck, same tools in the back, same quiet. If anything felt different in him at all, it didn't show on his face. Rocco felt the ground shifting under him in ways he couldn't quite name, and it made him careless in new directions. He started checking the jar twice before Friday nights now, resalting it earlier in the week instead of the same afternoon, as if changing the timing might change what people already suspected. He counted the cigar box himself every night before locking up, muttering the numbers under his breath, like a man trying to convince himself. They still added up the way he needed them to. None of it worked. The room had already made up its mind in the quiet way rooms do, one small doubt at a time, long before anyone said a single word about it out loud. It came 2 weeks later, on a night the brass anchor hadn't seen in over a year. Longshoremen 3 deep along the bar rail. Boxing club regulars posted up near the pool table, arms crossed, watching. Deckhand crews packed by the door, still in their work jackets, smelling of salt and diesel. Phones already out before anything had even started, because word had a way of moving on a harbor, and word had said something big was building tonight. The floor was slick with tracked-in rain. Somebody's boots squeaked every time they shifted weight near the pool table. The jukebox had been turned down low for once, more murmur than music. And under it the room hummed with the particular electricity of too many people packed too close, waiting on something none of them could quite name yet. A cigarette lighter clicked twice behind the bar, unlit, just a nervous hand, needing something to do. Somewhere near the door, ice cracked in a glass, too loud in a room already leaning toward silence. Lottie had counted heads twice already, and given up counting a third time. She'd never seen the anchor this full, not even on Frank's last St. Patrick's Day. And some part of her, small, buried under 3 months of worry, wondered if the building itself could feel it too. Petey had taken his usual booth 2 hours early, like he'd known to save it. He'd been drinking at the anchor, longer than Rocco had been alive, longer than Frank and Lottie had owned it even. And he'd watched enough Friday nights in this room to know the difference between noise and the real thing. He'd clocked something in Gus the very first night, the glass catch night, and he'd been waiting patiently ever since for the rest of the bar to catch up to what he already suspected. He nursed his rum slow tonight, same as always, and watched the door. Dale and Tomas stood together near the pool table, cues untouched, watching the door instead of the felt. Marcus came in with his whole crew this time, boots still unbought. Jaws set the same way. His had been the night he lost his $50. Even the old man in the faded ball cap had come down from his usual corner table, standing now near the wall, arms crossed, waiting on something he couldn't have explained to anybody who asked. Rocco moved through the crowd like a man drinking in the size of it, shaking hands, laughing louder than the room needed, checking his reflection in the mirror behind the liquor bottles more than once. He hadn't noticed yet that half the room wasn't looking at him with the same eyes it used to. He was too busy enjoying the size of the audience to notice what kind of audience it had become. Rocco felt that crowd and mistook every last ounce of it for love. He climbed up onto a bar stool, bell rope already looped around his fist, and pointed straight across the room at Gus. Somebody near the jukebox had gone still enough to hear their own pulse in their ears. A glass sweated a ring onto a table. Nobody was wiping anymore. One punch. "Old timer!" His voice cracked the whole room in half. Same offer as always. Double stakes tonight. $100 in the pot. Double for the janitor of toilets. The room went quiet in that particular way. A room goes quiet right before something happens that people will still be talking about a decade from now. Somebody near the door whispered it before anything even started. No way he does it again. Gus finished his beer, slow, unhurried, the way he did everything. He folded his reading glasses closed and hung them back on the chain around his neck. Then he stood, and the crowd near the pool table cleared a circle without anybody having to tell them to move. "You sure about this, old man?" Rocco called out, grinning wide for every phone in the place, playing the moment like he'd rehearsed it 100 times in his own head. Gus didn't answer with words. He just stepped into the circle, hands loose at his sides. Weight settled easy on both feet, the way a man stands who spent decades learning exactly where his balance lives. "Last chance to walk it back," Gus said, quiet. "Only for Rocco to hear. I'm asking you once." Rocco laughed in his face. "Walk it back? Old man, I've been waiting 2 years for a night like this." "Then you throw first," Gus said. "I won't." Somebody near the pool table hissed through their teeth, low, bracing for it. Petey had come off his stool without anybody noticing, standing now at the edge of the circle, arms folded, watching like a man, watching weather roll in over open water. Dale the welder had gone dead still by the jukebox, one hand still half raised from whatever he'd been about to say, before the room swallowed his voice whole. Lottie stood frozen behind the bar, both hands flat on the wood, watching the only 2 men in the building who mattered right now. Rocco threw the punch he was famous for. Big, looping. A haymaker built to end things fast and look devastating for a room full of witnesses recording every second of it. It missed by an inch. The whole bar heard the miss, heard the air move through the space where Gus's jaw wasn't anymore. A palm caught the follow-through of Rocco's arm and turned it sideways, gentle as closing a screen door. Rocco's own momentum did the rest of the work. His lead foot came down on a spot the floor had apparently been waiting to give him. For half a second, something older than the brass anchor moved through Gus's hands. A gravel yard in Georgia heat, 100 recruits circling a mat. His own voice, years younger, barking balance, leverage, breathe, muscle memory, older than this bar, older than the bell, older than Rocco himself. He was flat on the boards a half-second later, wrist pinned level against the wood. Gus's knee light across his shoulder, weight distributed calm and total. Nothing thrown, nothing swung, no punch landed at all in the entire exchange. Silence, total, glass still. The kind of silence a room only makes once in its whole history. A coach from the boxing club, half risen out of his chair without realizing he'd moved, stood frozen with one hand still on the table. Somewhere near the door, a phone hit the floor and nobody bent to pick it up. A woman near the jukebox pressed both hands flat over her mouth. Petey didn't move at all, just watched, arms still folded, like a man confirming something he'd already believed since the night of the beer glass. Gus held him there exactly as long as a lesson takes. Then he let go, unhurried, and stood up straight. For the first time in this entire story, his voice came out at a volume the room had never once heard from him. Drill field volume. The kind that used to carry clean across a whole formation of standing men without needing to be raised twice. One punch. You got it. It was yours. Nobody in the room breathed. 26 years Army, Gus said into the silence he'd just cracked wide open. Drill sergeant. Combatives instructor. I taught grown men how to fall before you were old enough to walk on your own. You want to know why I never told a single soul in this bar about any of it? Because it never mattered before tonight. Near the back wall, an older man in a faded ball cap. Nobody in the bar had ever asked what he did before he retired to this harbor town. Took his own cap off slow and held it against his chest. Quiet, the way men from a certain generation do when they hear a number like 26, spoken out loud by somebody who earned it. He turned toward the bar itself. Lottie stood behind it, register roll already unspooled in her hand, because Gus had quietly asked her that afternoon to be ready for exactly this moment. Read it, he said, gentle, not a command. A request between two people who trusted each other completely. Lottie's voice shook at the very start of it, then steadied line by line. $340. Rocco Lindell's tab. Never once paid. Going back 8 months on the register. Gus reached into his jacket and set the challenge jar on the bar top. The same jar he'd quietly lifted off the shelf an hour earlier while Rocco was busy holding court near the pool table. He upended it in one motion. Folded paper names spilled out across the wet wood, and he flattened a handful of them for the whole room to see clearly. Rocco's own handwriting, unmistakable, on every single slip, tourist names, drunk names, names picked in advance, folded in advance, salted into a jar that had never once in 2 years been random. Somebody near the pool table said it out loud, flat with disbelief that had been building for weeks. No way. A phone clattered onto a tabletop, forgotten entirely. A man near the front door just stood there, mouth open, his drink still raised halfway to his lips, frozen mid-motion. That's, one of the boxing club regulars started, then just shook his head, unable to finish the sentence. Dale the welder stepped closer, picked up one of the folded slips himself, turned it over in his cinder block hands like he needed to touch it to believe it. 2 years, he said. 2 years I put my name in that jar and never once got drawn. None of us did, Marcus said from the end of the bar, voice rough. He hadn't said much since the night he lost his boot money. He was saying plenty now. Rocco, still down, tried to find his voice. That's not, I can explain. Those are old slips. Those are from a different. Your handwriting doesn't change month to month, son, Gus said, and held one of the slips up higher for the room. A few people near the front actually laughed at that, short and sharp. The laugh of people who'd been waiting a long time to laugh at Rocco, instead of with him. You don't get to talk yet, Gus said. Not loud. He didn't need loud anymore. The room had already gone quiet enough to hear a coin drop. Rocco tried once more, scrambling up onto one knee before Gus's hand on his shoulder settled him back down, gentle, immovable. Come on, everybody does stuff like this. It's just a bar game. A bar game doesn't take a kid's boot money, Marcus said, louder now, stepping closer to the circle. A bar game doesn't need a rigged jar. A bar game doesn't reach into a widow's till while she's counting stock in the cellar, Gus said, and that one landed harder than anything else had all night. Even Rocco stopped talking. Gus wasn't finished yet. He walked around behind the bar himself, opened the cigar box, and counted it out loud in front of the entire room. Every dollar, every torn ticket stub, every crumpled bill that had come out of men like Marcus, who'd needed that money for boots and rent and things that mattered a great deal more than a bell over a bar. $412, he said, and pushed the whole box across the bar into Lottie's hands. That's yours. Always was. Petey the longshoreman rose from his corner booth, slow, the way a big man rises only after he's already made his decision. He walked the length of the bar to the bell, unhooked it from its mount without a single word, and set it gently into Lottie's open hands. She looked down at it, like she didn't quite know what to do with something that quiet, something that had been so loud for so long and now weighed almost nothing at all. Her fingers closed around the brass slow, and for just a second her composure cracked. Not tears, not quite, just a long breath, held too long, finally let go. Frank would have liked this room tonight, she thought, though she didn't say it out loud to anybody. She set the bell on the shelf behind the register herself, gentle, like laying something to rest that had earned the rest. Rocco was still down on the floor, wrist released now, staring straight up at a ceiling that must have felt 100 feet higher than it had 5 minutes earlier. Nobody rushed to help him up. Nobody needed to. The room had already moved on from him entirely, the way a tide moves on from a rock it's finished wearing down. He got up on his own eventually, slow, nobody offering a hand, nobody blocking his way either. He stood there a moment in the circle that had cleared for him an hour earlier, and now nobody would meet his eyes at all. Lottie. His voice came out smaller than the room had ever heard it. Lottie, not tonight, she said. The same 2 words Gus had used weeks earlier over a swept beer. And everybody close enough to remember that night felt the echo of it land. Come by tomorrow sober. We'll talk about what you owe and how you're going to pay it. Rocco nodded once and walked out through a crowd that parted for him without a single word spoken, the same way it might part for a stranger nobody recognized anymore. The door swung shut behind him, and for a long moment nobody in the brass anchor said anything at all. Then, slowly, quietly, the room started talking again. Not about Rocco, not really. About Gus. About 26 years nobody had known to ask about. About a plumber who fixed pipes for free and had apparently been capable of ending the whole charade at any point he chose to, and never had, not until tonight, not until it mattered. Gus finished his beer at the bar, same stool, same unhurried pace, like the last 10 minutes hadn't happened at all. Lottie set a second one down in front of him, without being asked. He looked at it a moment, surprised. On the house, she said. First and last time. Don't get used to it. He almost smiled at that. Almost. The following Friday, the brass anchor looked almost exactly like it always had before any of this started. Gus was under the sink at 4 in the afternoon, fixing the same sprayer hose he'd already fixed once, because pipes wear down over time, and somebody has to care enough to keep fixing them anyway. At 6 o'clock sharp, he had his one beer, reading glasses on the chain around his neck. Same stool, same quiet. The bell sat up on a shelf behind the register, now retired for good, dust already starting to settle soft into the brass. Rocco was down in the cellar most nights that followed, stacking crates and scrubbing the tap lines, working off what he owed Lottie on her terms now, never his own. He didn't ring anything anymore. He didn't crown himself anything anymore. He just worked, quiet, head down, the way a man works when the whole room has already decided exactly who he is. The harbor crews had heard the entire story by Monday morning, the way harbor stories always travel fast and exact, and by Wednesday they'd organized a fundraiser. Nobody had asked them to run. It started as a jar of its own. Ironically enough, this one sitting on the counter of the bait shop down by the docks, hand-labeled in marker, by somebody who clearly appreciated the symmetry. For Lottie, no catch. Boat captains dropped in 20s between shifts. A crew that had stopped drinking at the Anchor months earlier came back just to put money in that jar, then stayed for a beer after, first time in a season. The bait shop owner refused to take a cut for letting the jar sit on his counter, said it was the least he could do for Lottie after 20 years of buying his hooks. By the following Wednesday, it had more than covered what the Anchor still owed, with enough left that Lottie tried to give some of it back and got waved off by every single person who'd contributed. You poured Frank's first beer in this town, Petey told her, arms crossed, refusing the folded bills she tried to hand back. You're not paying us back for that. Marcus got his $50 returned in a plain envelope, slid across the bar by Lottie herself on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. He opened it right there, counted it twice, and found more than 50 folded inside, enough extra for the steel-toe boots he'd needed all along. I can't take this, he started. And Lottie just shook her head, already walking away to wipe down another table. Somebody already decided you could, she said. Take it up with him. Marcus looked over at Gus, under the sink again, wrench in hand, not even looking up. Marcus didn't say anything else. He just nodded, folded the envelope into his jacket, and bought the boots that Saturday. Wore them proud on the boat the following Monday. Told his crew the whole story twice before lunch, and a third time that evening for anybody who hadn't been listening close enough the first two. Gus didn't take credit for any of it. He never once brought it up again unless somebody else raised it first, and even then he kept it short. One night, weeks later, a new customer at the bar asked him straight out if the stories were true. The drill sergeant thing, the takedown, all of it. Gus just shrugged. Finished tightening a bolt under the bar with a small wrench he kept in his jacket out of habit now. I fix pipes, he said. Ask Lottie about the rest. Lottie smiled at that from behind the register, the first easy smile she'd worn in longer than she could remember. The loan was paid. The bar was full again. Not with challenge night crowds chasing a bell, but with regulars who came back, because the place finally felt like it used to. Honest, warm, unhurried. Rocco finished his debt to her 3 months later, to the dollar, tracked on a notepad Lottie kept behind the bar instead of a chalkboard. The seller's work suited him more than anybody expected, least of all Rocco himself. Stacking crates, changing tap lines, learning the parts of the bar that had always run underneath the parts he used to show off in. Once, Gus found him down there struggling with a stuck valve, and without a word, showed him the trick to loosening it. Rocco watched his hands the way a much younger man watches somebody who actually knows what he's doing. "Why'd you wait so long?" Rocco asked him once, down in the cellar, not looking up from the valve. "You could have ended it any Friday you wanted." Gus thought about that a moment. "Wasn't sure yet. Once I was sure, it didn't take long at all." He still came in sometimes, quieter now, sat at the far end, nursed one drink same as anybody. Nobody brought up the bell. He never asked them to. Some Fridays now, a new face at the bar asks Lottie about the empty hook behind the register, the one with a faint outline in the dust where something used to hang. She just points to the shelf where the bell sits quiet next to a row of old bottles and says the whole story in one line. "That used to be loud." Turns out loud was never the point. Legends don't need volume. Bells are just loud. Here's the question worth sitting with tonight. Gus watched that rigged jar for weeks before he ever moved, making absolutely certain before acting, while strangers kept losing $50 a night. In the meantime, was that careful justice or expensive patience? Tell us below. If this story hit you, subscribe now. Share it with someone who respects quiet strength. And tell us in the comments which moment hit you the hardest. We will see you for the next story. It is already waiting.